This is Ash Hamilton from horror-fix.com. That's horrorfix.com. I've got Michael Perry on. He is going to be talking about being a production designer on the set of the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Glad to have him on tonight. We saw the film. Actually, we really enjoyed it. And I was very excited to get to talk to you, Michael, because one thing that we kept commenting on as we were watching the film was the sort of the art direction, some of the set design. As a production designer, getting to be able to talk to you, I think we're going to have a lot of fun. So how are you doing tonight, by the way?
I'm doing very well. I'm very excited to. I've seen the. I had one interview, and I've seen a few interviews with the director, and it's really gratifying because I know there's been a lot of like, oh, they fired the directors. Oh, they're doing this. I don't think it's good to hear people finally go, oh, I saw it. It's good. It isn't. It isn't anything we thought it was going to be. So that's exciting.
Yeah, and I think as horror fans, people, and this is something that's kind of strange too when you have genre fans that are very dedicated to a particular franchise, is they always sort of go in a little leery,
Right.
a little hesitant, and I had another one of our crew watching with us, and about the first 20 minutes in, we were like, this is really good. like we were, as fans of the franchise and as fans of the genre in general, like we were very pleasantly surprised and really enjoyed it. And one thing that we talked about when we were watching it was the town of Harlow.
Yeah.
I think first of all, it was not only an interesting, but I think a necessary choice to take this franchise in a little bit of a different location. Um,
Exactly.
and let's talk a little bit about that location first of all. So, what was really the genesis of sort of the design behind Harlow and approaching it not only as a horror film but as a Texas Chainsaw Massacre film?
Well, there are a couple of things going into it. So I don't know if everybody knows this, but that was shot in Bulgaria. I built that town. Um, so, or me and my crew, I should say my crew, my Bulgarian crew were exceptional, just mind-boggling what they were able to do. Um, so the genesis is we looked at all the sequels. Everybody's trying to catch what Toby did in the very first one. There's a house, there's a field, there's it's like, well, that isn't really a sequel. That's just an extension trying to catch that. So we've got the space now of 60 years. Fede Alvarez, wrote the script and came up with the idea that he went to someplace safe and he's never left it and never had to leave it. So what happens in the show? Sorry, I'm just like babbling here a little bit, but
Oh no, go right ahead.
the idea of the town, we looked at a lot of pictures of I've driven through Texas, I've shot in Texas. You can name me almost any look, and there's some part of Texas that looks like that, which definitely worked in our favor. And going through pictures and things, you could see that they're fairly ornate buildings in these little towns. And I didn't really understand why that was. And I looked to research, which I do a lot of. When University of Texas started an architectural school, they sent all of their architects to the 1898 World's Fair, which was this very elaborate setup. So when they came back, civil buildings started to appear, like with a lot of friezes and changing up brickwork, and very decorative, but very ordinary, down there. So it looks, it's the turn of the century, probably came into its real prime mid to late 40s into the 50s, cowland, bringing things in, sunflower seeds, and then started to go downhill, and to the point, it's like one of the things I really wanted to do was also throw in different there'd be heights and lows. So there's a building on the end, which is definitely like I did as a 70s building. That's the Farm Bureau and the IRS. The government threw some money their way. That's what they did with it. So that was the genesis of having a town that felt like it was in Texas that we could take advantage of in as many ways as possible. A lot of people go, well, why didn't you just shoot in Texas? I couldn't lock down a town for 38 days and nights.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That's really what it came down to. It was more affordable to build it.
Now, what I think was very interesting to me, especially because of my upbringing, where I grew up. So I grew up in the Midwest. And one thing that we noticed sort of happening into the early 90s and into the 2000s was that as industry left the Midwest, a lot of these towns that at one point in time had a lot of commerce, people were traversing from town to town through jobs. There were more career-focused jobs available. As those things left the area, we started to see these towns start to develop their own strange personalities. And I found that in Harlow. So it's interesting to hear about it being a fabricated town, but you managed to infuse it with some kind of personality. Like how was the process for that to make it almost feel like it was its own entity?
Well, I always look at scenery as a chance to either enhance a character or be a character. So, and for years I did commercials. So when you look at something on a commercial, it needs to be iconic. People need to know where they are, need to know what to do. And I did a lot of commercials overseas that you had to believe was an American kitchen or, whatever it was. So I wanted it, when you looked at that town, to go, okay, we're in the middle of nowhere. This is sad. I wanted it to be sad, because there needs to be that tension between the old and the new.
Yeah.
Which we definitely played with a lot of it. But to your answer, I shot a movie in Ohio, in Middleton, Ohio, a few years back. And that's the perfect example of a beautiful town that's just fallen apart in all the wrong ways. They were trying to sell me buildings there for like, $100, but you'd have to clean them up. It's like, yeah, but there's way too much asbestos. But it was beautiful. But like you were saying, then it becomes its own character, where they had an upholstery shop there, which was my favorite. The guy used to hire ex-cons. It was the worst upholstery jobs I'd ever seen in my life. But that was the only place there. So everything kind of, I had stores that probably were drugstores at one point that now are like, 99-cent stores. So it's that layer and layer and layer and layer. I just know that that's what you have to do in order to make it believable. And then you give it that character so you can heighten whatever is going on in there.
And I love the idea that when we get that glimpse at Harlow, the ghosts of the town tells us that at one point it was going somewhere.
Right. Yes. I mean, that's the story of most of America when you go to these towns, and they banked everything. I was actually in Ohio. I met people that were my age, that their parents told them, oh, drop out of high school because you make $60 an hour at the factory. Well, when the factory went away, they were working the Wendy's window, drive-up window, because they didn't have that. And it's such an opposite of my parents, who always pushed me towards college.
Yeah.
So I do think that that's a lot of it, and then now Harlow, we talked about it. You're 18 years old, you're out of there.
Yeah.
It holds nothing for you. There's no thing to do except, So we wanted Harlow to feel like everybody left maybe a month ago.
Yeah.
They'd all get their money that they could, and everybody was out except for the people that are there.
And talking about some of the architecture and the design behind the town, which I really enjoyed, is that because obviously we're set in Texas, because I think of a lot of the color palettes that we associate with Texas
Right.
and associate with Western states in general, is that they always have sort of this Dust Bowl sort of feel to them.
Yeah.
And then we see something like the theater, which is very reminiscent of the 1950s Art Deco marquee, and I
Yeah.
love that sort of contrast. So, what was your inspiration as far as the theater? Were you looking at those old sort of mom and pop
Oh yeah.
marquees?
Oh yeah. We have one out here. We have a couple. There's a couple of those. I've always, here, obviously in Los Angeles, movie theaters kind of can stay. They don't get outdated. They get
Yeah,
updated. Um, so yeah, in my mind, it mentions a theater in the script, but it wasn't so as front and forward as it was. So yeah, that was a lot. It was a lot of fun to do all of that stuff, and I had an amazing bunch of guys that, as opposed to drafting their sketch, well, they did some sketch. We did some sketches, but they would make like 3D models in Rhino, so I could see how everything fit, and then we could actually physically move buildings to different spots before we ever started building. Just sort of, it felt like it was of a piece. And that's the hardest part, right? You can do the whole thing and you can look at it and you go, oh, that's a set.
yeah. And I think that's one thing that you definitely accomplished is that it did not look like a set.
Thank you.
And speaking of sets and what a lot of us know about being able to materialize a town for a film, how much of the set was more than just the facade? Were there any buildings that obviously had a little more
Yeah.
guts than the others?
Yeah. Well, the orphanage on the first floor was all built for real. And we had the same staircase, but there wasn't much up there but a camera platform. We see a couple of shots from out that. The garage was built. There was another movie that had shells of buildings there, so we had a lot of reinforcement, but the garage was pretty solid, so we just revamped it. I did the Alamo on the outside. And then everything else was stage. Yeah. So
So,
the second floor, all that, the bus.
and the bus is a pretty incredible set piece
Yeah, it is.
in and of itself. Now, did you have a hand in that as well?
I had the biggest hand, not in the bus scene, but in the bus, because there were a few things that I had to deal with. One, I'm in the middle of Europe, and I got to find an American bus,
Yeah.
right? And we had but weirdly enough, that was a 1949 scenic cruiser that was used by Greyhound, and it
That was one of
was
my next questions, by the way, because I mean it's a beautiful, beautiful piece of machinery.
stunning piece of machinery. I fixated on trying to figure out how to bring it home, and I could never come up with something that was worth the expense. So we found that in Germany. We had it brought over. It was not beautiful, but I had guys work on the exterior, get new tires, that whole thing, and then the interior. Somebody had turned it into it looked like in the 70s they'd used like a hippie thing that would go around the world in.
A bit of a
So we
commune on
gutted it
wheels.
entirely. Yeah, so we gutted it entirely and rebuilt some of the seats. We were able to track down in the front of the bus, like 4 rows. So those are real seats. We had them recovered. And then, yeah, I mean, at one point, a couple of producers were like, well, I don't know if this looks American. And like, I just started sending, brochures from 49 and 50 and 60, of this. And it was even in Texas, there was a great one where it's like, we go to Austin, Texas. And there was, the scenic cruiser. And then we wanted to make it, the interior. I will claim responsibility for the ceiling. I wanted it white. And you know why I wanted it white.
It made for some very good contrast.
Right?
Some high
Yep.
contrast and a lot of
Yep.
fantastic scenes. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the genesis of that. We all knew that bus scene was the massacre in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So and all the interior is a set. We recreated the entire, and there are some shots that you'll see that come up or a shot from the window. Those guys in Bulgaria hand carved that stuff. I've never seen what they do with MDF in my life, but they reproduced it perfectly. It was insane. So that was fun. That was really fun.
Now, what were some of the precursors to working on Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Obviously, it's a very highly visible franchise. So,
Right.
as far as becoming a part of the crew, what was the genesis of that?
Well, here's the thing. I've done some horror movies that have gotten some. It Follows being the biggest one, of sort of fame.
Mm-hmm.
I have another one that we'll see when it comes out that I'll do as well. So, listen, I'm not a big fan of slashers. I did Hellfest. That was a lot of fun. I consider that an opera. This, I decided, when it was presented to me, and that was presented to me as we're going to build the town in Bulgaria, they had me, because who gets to do a backlot?
Yeah.
And it's, so, the fact of the matter is I am a Hollywood designer, and I came of an age where all those older guys were there and I learned from them. So I was able to kind of put that stuff together. So that was the opportunity for me. Also, the fact was, when I read the script, I went, okay, they're not chasing, they're making their own movie.
Yeah.
And it's this character. And we've got enough space that I think we can actually do something special with this. And then you get into, now I'm part of the, Texas Chainsaw group. I'm one of the few people that have done one of these.
Yeah, you've been inducted into the family at this point.
Exactly. Right? I'm in the family now. I'm in the Sawyer family. So it was, it was all that. It was also, I have to challenge myself these days. And that was going to Bulgaria and getting that done. That was a big challenge.
I think the film is going to be very well received, and I think it's going to be very well received by fans. I know that it comes out, and probably by the time we post this, people will be sort of getting to see it on Netflix this Friday.
Yeah.
I believe February the 18th. And, yes. We were lucky enough, to be able to see a preview, and we were lucky enough to also talk to the director and
David
and Fede as well.
I have to give, David is definitely badass. He came into that project. We're a week into shooting, and he and Rick Diaz, they're buddies. Rick is the DP. Mm-hmm. They came in and they made it their own, and that's hard to do. I don't think they ever slept, but.
So there's something that's very decidedly 1974 Texas Chainsaw Massacre about this film. Aside from, the sequels and everything, like this film, we've talked about the color palette and the grading, everything mm-hmm. really speaks to the original film. Did that mm-hmm. have a lot of play on how you were doing the town?
Yes. After David came, that was definitely the way we swung it. It was slightly different before that. And what I liked was too David's thing of grindhouse but elevated.
Yeah.
Because what we wanted to do was give a really beautiful looking movie that scares the hell out of you. And I think that that was the goal. Listen, give it up to Legendary too, because they put the money into it. Yeah. It wasn't done for the original 300,000 that the right. First one was, or 30,000, I think. So, the idea was to go in and do a definitive sequel that it stands by itself.
I think the one thing that impressed me, and we've talked about this a little bit earlier in the interview, about the fact that the scope of this has changed as far as locations. In the original, we're dealing with a ton of interiors, and even
Right.
though we have some fantastic interiors in this, I think one thing that speaks about this film that separates it is that, as you're watching the original film, you're always thinking in the back of your mind, if I'm spry enough and I can get out that front door, I can outdistance this
Right.
man and I can run away. And now that we got him in an element that's not just this house, but this town, it sort of becomes, that much more like the turn of every corner is a little more insidious. This
Right.
idea of not just getting out of the house, but getting away from him in general has become an entirely different monster altogether.
Yeah. No, and that's, I mean, I also think that has to do with we're doing it 60 years later. What certainly, I've talked about this a long time ago with It Follows, we widen the scope. So, I think as people, especially now in this, pandemic, everything is scary.
Yeah.
And if and our idea was you can't get away from it. There's no running. He's like the pandemic. He just keeps coming. And anything like you're saying, like, I'll get in the car. That's not going to work.
Right. And I do love the idea too, that because this is sort of a town out of time, every element that sort of comes into it, which should be a safety net as far as modern
Right.
technology, is completely useless.
Yeah, I mean, and again, that's the whole. I mean, the beginning of the bus scene is very funny because of the technology.
Yes.
So yeah, he hasn't been watching the internet. He's not been on the internet. You know what I mean?
Right.
He's and I feel like in a lot of ways, he was our Leatherface is. I want to say. Certainly some of the ways we shot it sometimes was right out of the Marvel comic books. It's those silhouettes, those things. So it kind of even changes your opinion. You're kind of sympathetic, but then you're also really repulsed, which that's David. He managed to do that somehow.
I think that was great that they were able to keep some of that classic iconography that fans really love. But at the same time, we didn't get characters that were so black and white and flat that there was any
Yeah.
real element to vilify here.
Right.
You watch it from a lot of different perspectives, and I think that was very interesting. I've got one more question for you, and this is a question that I absolutely love asking people in the industry.
All right.
As an artist in your medium, what's the last film that you saw that you looked at and just said to yourself, "Wow, they've really done something special
I've
here"?
got it. I just recently watched The United States versus Billie Holiday. It was shot on film, which
Mhm.
you see. It was stunningly designed, stunningly shot, stunningly lit. So much so that, and at my age, with my experience, it doesn't often happen to me, but I went, I don't know if I could have pulled that off. It's just a stunningly beautiful piece. I mean, look, Dune is great. There are a lot of great movies, but I also look at those. I could have done that. I don't know if I could have made those beautiful. I like to think I could. Those beautiful little moments.
Mhm.
It's like a jewel box. You just open it and it's just like, oh, this is beautiful. And it's, yeah. So in the last few weeks, I actually looked at that and went, oh,
It does that sometimes revitalize your interest? I know as a
oh,
person who watches a ton of movies, there are times where you hit some lulls, and everything
yeah.
becomes a little old hat. When you see something like that, did it really sort of like just make you go, "Wow!" Like there's more to do out there.
It Yes. I mean, it's interesting why I take the movies I do now. For instance, last week on Amazon, I had a rom-com open, which I did after Texas, just because I was like, the last 3 movies, the body count's been high. I haven't done a really good art film since Promising Young Woman.
Maybe
Now
cleanse
I'm
the
gonna
palate a little bit.
exactly. So it definitely is cleansing the palate. So I don't want to be typecast in any such way, which does happen sometimes. But I always look for what the challenge is going to be. And sometimes the challenge, the last film I just shot, one of the reasons it was a really good script, but one of the reasons I wanted to do it is my grandson can't see any of my movies. I don't have any PG movies. So I kind of did it for that reason, that he could actually, and it was and it was fun, and it was,
Yeah.
But he's not seeing this for another 6 years. So yeah, so I'm always looking for that. What's that challenge? I'm old enough now and experienced enough now to know I don't know anything. So each project I try to do a different way. There are some things I can't, I repeat myself in the use of color, things like that. But it's always looking for that challenge. And, I always go back to It Follows, because every production designer in this city turned that movie down. I was, obviously the last person to read it, but I got that script on a Friday night and I was in Detroit Sunday.
Wow.
Because I saw something in it that was totally different.
Yeah.
Worth all the pain that I knew was coming. And so that I always look for that now. I get scripts that are from $2 million to $70 million. And if the $2 million one is good, that's where I'm going to go.
Well, I'm urging everyone to definitely take a look at Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I had a ton of fun with it, and I think that people are, like I said, are going to be very pleasantly surprised. I think it's a testament to the people who worked on it and the people who really did put their blood, sweat, and tears into it. And the creative, engine is really there, and it's revving high on this film.
Yeah.
There's some really both interesting and genuine moments in this. Do you have just a few moments off the air for me, Michael?
Yeah, absolutely, man.
I will, again, everyone, February 18th, please head on over to Netflix, check out Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Some great performances, and again, just seeing the town of Harlow, which I'm so glad we were able to discuss tonight, Michael, because it was such a pleasure doing that with you. So February 18th, make sure, head on over to Netflix, Texas Chainsaw Massacre.